my decision to spend a year of graduate school in Jerusalem. First, my Jewish identity was purely culinary. And second, I did it because it was a free trip. It was 1990 and the Palestinian uprising, the Intifada, was well underway. Unlike today's suicide bombers and Qassam rockets, this was Intifada 1.0. Rocks thrown at buses, the rare throat slashing or unmanned explosive. There was still a sense of safety outside the West Bank. At Jerusalem discos, soldiers would routinely pile their guns in the corner to dance with their favorite partners, themselves in the mirror, unencumbered by firearms, no thought to who might grab one and start shooting. I arrived in Israel a quasi-pacifist leftist, believing Israelis were aggressors and Palestinians their innocent victims. If they took up arms, I rationalized, it was merely self-defense. But Israel seemed determined to chip away at my beliefs. I met Israelis against the occupation and Palestinian women desperate for liberation from a brutal sexist culture. I was interrogated by Israeli Arabs about my pro-Palestinian leanings, resulting in a ransacked apartment. So when a Palestinian bomb killed an Israeli farmer at my local vegetable market, I began to feel uncertain. And something else happened to me. Eating a daily dose of fried, grease-wrapped in warm pita bread doused with hummus and tahini and piled with eggplant, onions, and peppers dripping with olive oil, all courtesy of the supersized falafel bar at the Falafel King, I started to get really fat. The fatter I got, the more depressed I became that the boyfriend I had left behind wasn't writing to me, not even a postcard. And the more determined I became to forget him. So I joined a group 3-day coast-to-coast hiking trip, although the majority of participants were American undergrads, too immature for my lofty 23 years. I met Egal on the first day of the hike when he asked for a light. He was the Israeli soldier, the man with the gun, making sure nobody harmed a hair on our little American heads. He was also very cute. That night, he and I sat away from the campfire where the American students were singing and toasting marshmallows. Egal told me he spoke Arabic fluently and was in the Special Forces, regularly infiltrating Syria to assassinate the enemy. I asked if he had killed anyone. Of course, he said, adding, I could die at any moment, making clear only his life mattered. He also made it clear he wanted to get in my pants despite their tightness around my hips. And while he was cute, he was a cold-blooded killer and I had standards. Realizing war stories were not an aphrodisiac, he changed tactics. I'm a model, he said. Let him kiss me. He went for my zipper and I slapped his hand. He said he loved me. I laughed. Oh, please, I said, standing up. I might have been chubby and desperate, but I wasn't stupid. Tinook, he shouted as I walked away, calling me a child. The next day, Egal was back by my side as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, we climbed a hill of rocks away from the others and sat watching 2 dirty, shirtless Arab boys jumping from above a small waterfall into a filthy waterhole. I go swim with those boys, hold my gun, Egal said. After being in Israel for a few months, I was used to guns. It no longer shocked me to ask a soldier on a crowded bus to please get his Uzi out of my ribcage. But when I thought about holding a gun, it was similar to the feeling I had at the Grand Canyon. Not a fear of heights, but an overwhelming compulsion to jump. I was not afraid of the gun, but the strong desire I knew I would have to shoot it. I can't, I told Egal. You must, they're Arab, Egal said, nodding his head at the boys. I looked over. They were about 7 years old, dark and skinny, covered with scratches. They're Tinukim, I said, children. He shouted something to the boys in Arabic, and they looked back, nodding and smiling. No Tinukim, he said, Arab, terrorists. Were we witnessing the same 2 children? I thought again about holding the gun. I imagined Egal with his olive skin, shirtless, splashing in the water with those boys, the gun heavy in my hands, the cool metal against my skin, my index finger hooked in place. Hold my gun, he said with force. The sun was starting to make its way down from its apex in the sky, buzzing mosquitoes and the water flowing over the rock wall, creating a symphony for its descent. I can't, I don't want to, I don't believe in guns, I don't believe in violence, I said in rapid English. Egal looked at me blankly. I am a pacifist, I said, then in Hebrew, Ani Shalom, I am peace. He shook his head laughing. In Israel, only Americans are pacifists. No, I said, my friend Donnie is a pacifist. He refused to go to Lebanon. He's not pacifist, Igal replied. He is pachdan, a coward. Lech mipo, I said, go away. The boys were climbing above the waterfall. He shouted to them in Arabic again, and when they looked over, he made a circular motion with his index finger at his temple and pointed at me. The boys laughed. This guy was repugnant, but he was into me. So that night, I did what every peace and justice studies minoring, leftist, self-proclaimed feminist does when they want to put a macho gun-toting Israeli in his place. I slept with them. Or rather, I tried. I believe the military term for what happened is trigger happy. His friendly fire was a little too eager to make friends. Did you come? He asked me in Hebrew, lighting a cigarette. No, I said, gathering my things. It takes me more than 3 seconds. And I stomped back to my tent. The next and final day of hiking, Igal avoided me. If he came near, it was to glare or to make sure I could see him flirting with other girls. In retaliation, I spoke loudly to my friends about what a lousy leg he was. That night on the bus back to Jerusalem, Igal sat with the giggly undergrads and I sat in the very back. I felt some regret. Maybe if I'd been nicer, I could have had an Israeli boyfriend in time for my 24th birthday. Maybe despite my girth, he really found me attractive and that's why he couldn't control himself, but it was too late. Around 2 a.m., there was a loud thud and our bus came to a jolting halt. After a heated Hebrew conversation between Igal, the tour guides, and the bus driver, it became clear the bus had 2 flat tires and that we were right in the middle of the danger zone, the West Bank, where Jews were met by hopeless Palestinians languishing in refugee camps with knives and homemade bombs. The males among us discussed changing the tires, but the bus was full of American students and weighed about 2 tons. Nobody knew how to change a tire on a bus, and there were no spares. Besides, getting out of the bus was too risky. There were no cell phones, no walking to a nearby gas station to make an emergency call. The only option was to hope that patrolling Israeli military saw us and didn't shoot, thinking we were a big yellow bus bomb. And if Palestinians found us first, well, we had 1 soldier and 1 gun for protection, and it was in the hands of the man whose sexual performance I had ridiculed. If this became a hostage situation, I was certain I would be the first person traded over to the enemy. Suddenly in my mind, the Palestinians were no longer peaceful victims, but people wanting to kill me. And that gun, that 1 gun I had wanted nothing to do with, I wondered how many rounds Igal might be hiding in his jacket and hoped he wasn't bullshitting about the Special Forces thing. I hoped he was some kind of badass Israeli that could take on an entire Palestinian militia single-handed Rambo style, taking every last one of them out. The Israeli army did show up after an excruciating hour of imagining the various ways I might be murdered by a Palestinian mob. They shouted through a bullhorn in Arabic, Hebrew, and English to get out with our hands up. Igal and the bus driver went first, followed by a few trembling students. Within minutes, the soldiers radioed for the military escort to pick us up. We were boarded onto military trucks protected by well-armed Israeli soldiers. I had never been so happy to see men sporting guns and hand grenades in my life. Life is complicated. People are complicated. War is complicated. Victims are perpetrators, and perpetrators are victims. These Israeli soldiers might be calling Arab children terrorists the next day, but at that moment, they were my protectors, and I was extremely grateful. Igal was not on the truck that took me safely out of the West Bank. I never saw him again, but I have a picture of us. I'm wearing an oversized t-shirt, jeans, and hiking boots. He's wearing fatigues with a gun slung across his hip. We are smoking, holding hands, and walking a trail that cuts across Israel from sea to sea.